How are you, developers? I hope you're fine. In today's class, we'll be learning about flexible box layout in CSS, or in short, CSS Flexbox. So CSS Flexbox allows you to design complex and responsive web layouts with ease. It provides a more efficient way to distribute space and align items within a container, especially when dealing with dynamic or unknown sizes of elements. So if that seems interesting to you, let's dive in. If you have been following the course, you are aware that before any class, you have to pull the resources from GitHub. So you can just go to the repository that you cloned and forked and use the git pull command to get today's notes. And if you are new, I'll provide the GitHub link in the video description. So you can just clone the repository using that link. So without much ado, let's start learning about CSS Flexbox. If you pull the notes, you'll see this folder here written 11 Flexbox. It is inside the CSS folder. So if you open the CSS folder, you can see this 11 Flexbox. Then inside there, you'll see the readme. That is the notes that we're using this course. So I'll just create my HTML file inside the folder, index.html, and my CSS file, style.css. Then the HTML, I'll put the boilerplate there. Then I'll rename the title to CSS Flexbox. Then I'll add the link to my style sheet, like that. So now I have my HTML file here, my CSS file here. This readme, I'll open it using the markdown previewer, like that. So I can just close this and minimize this. So you can see I have my HTML file there, my CSS file here, and my notes in this readme markdown previewer here. So now I'm set to start the class. So before Flexbox was introduced, developers were creating layouts using floats and positions. The positions that we learned last week, those are the ones that developers are using to create layouts. But now, since Flexbox is introduced, creating layouts has become easier because you just have to have a container and just give it a display of flex, and it will be a flex container. Then anything inside that container will be the flex children. You can see it here in the notes. So for you to demonstrate that, I'll just create a div. I'll create a div inside the body here. Create a div and give it a class of container, like that. Then inside the div, I'll create 3 children, and all of them will be a div of class item. So I'll write div.item times 3 for me to have 3 divs with a class of item. And then each item, I'll give it a unique class. We said that an element can have more than one class. So the first one, I'll call it item 1. The second div, I'll call it item 2, and the last div, I'll call it item 3. Then allow me to give this div contents. I'll just write here 1, then 2, then 3. Yeah, that is it with the HTML. So I have a parent div, and the div has 3 items. So I'll just go to the styles and style the container, style.container, and I'll give it a width and a height. Give it a width of 80%. It's something like 80%. I'll give it a height of something like, let's give it 700 pixels. And I'll center it using margin 0 auto for it to be at the center. So I'll say margin 0 auto. That is one way that we looked at how we can center a div, and that is the one that I'm using here. Then I'll also give it a border, 2 pixels, solid red, like that. Then I'll style the items, give it a class of item. The children, we give them a class of item. So I'll style also the items. I'll give them a width of, let's say, something like 150 pixels. Then we'll give them a height, also 150 pixels for it to be a square. Then I'll give them, let's give them a background color and also a border. So I'll give them a background color of, I'll give them red, so let's give it this one blue, or let me use RGB, RGB, just RGB. And to select a shade of blue, and I'm not sure which shade I'm selecting, so I'll just click this color picker here and select a shade of blue. I think this one is fine. This one is just a lighter. Yeah, I think that one is fine. Yeah. Then I'll give it a border. Now the border will be blue. Let's give it something like 5 pixels for it to be thick. Solid blue. That one is fine. Then let me adjust the padding. I'll give that container a padding of 20 pixels for it to have some space. Then and to align the content at least at the center, so I'll use the text align property that we learned. Text align. Then I'll say center. And I think I'll at least maybe let me adjust the font weight. I'll give it a font weight of something that is bolder. Yeah, and that is it. I think our item, our child item will be good. But let's just add this wire radius for it to have a smooth edge. And all these properties we already talked about them, so I assume that everyone is comfortable with those properties. And let us go to the browser and see what we have before we start learning about Flexbox. Let's go to the browser. Let me also add some font weight for the. Did I add font weight? I think I added font weight. Font weight I added it. I think that is fine. So let's go to the browser and see how this looks like. So if you go to the browser, you can see that we have our container here. It has a red border and we have 3 items. 1, 2, 3. But I think these labels are small, so I'll try to increase the font weight of this one. You can see we have our 3 children there, and I think that is fine. Let me try to increase the font weight and see what will be the effect. I'll try to the developer options, then I'll shift. Where is that item? Inside the container and this specific item. Font. Let me add here below it. Font size. Something like 20 pixels. Is that even big? I think it's still small. Let me put something like 50. I think 50 is okay. I think 50 is visible. Yeah. I think 50 pixels is visible. So I'll just use 50 pixels. So I'll write this line of code in my VS Code. So I think you've seen how the container is and how the children are. So let us go to VS Code and start learning about Flexbox. So like we said, I'll add the font size in my VS Code. I copied it from the developer options and I pasted it here for the numbers to be visible, the 1, 2, and 3, and them to be a little bit huge. So now just start learning about Flexbox. And you can see this line in the notes is saying that for you to give a container to be, for a container to be a Flexbox container, you have to put the display flex or display inline flex, and you'll use display inline flex if you want the container to behave like an inline element. But this display flex is just okay, but the container will just behave normally like a block element, because say by default divs are block level elements. So if you say display flex, it will behave like display flex. It will behave like a normal container, but it will be now this container will turn into a Flexbox, and this div will be a Flexbox now, and these items, these 3 children will be Flexbox items or Flexbox children's. And you'll just go to the browser and see how they behave. So if you go to the browser, you can see now our items are no longer stacked on top of each other, but they're placed in the same line. And that is because when you set a container to have a display flex, it will create a main axis and a cross axis. And by default, a main axis runs from left to right. and elements are always positioned along the main axis when you put display flex. You can see if you remove this display flex here, you can see our elements are stuck on top of each other. But if you put display flex, the container turns into a flex container and it creates a cross axis. Cross axis runs from top to bottom and the main axis runs from left to right. So when you put display flex, you'll create two axes, the cross and the main axis. And elements are usually aligned along the main axis. And I've said the main axis is left to right. And that is how our elements are aligned left to right. Let me show you an image of how the cross axis and the main axis look like. So as you can see in the image there, the main axis is horizontal and the cross axis is vertical. That is the default behavior of the main and cross axis. But you can always change this behavior, and we'll learn how to change this behavior using the flex direction property. Now we know about the main axis and the cross axis, and I've said that the main axis by default is horizontal from left to right, but you can always change that direction using you can always change the direction of the main axis using the flex direction property. So I'll just put here flex direction. Flex direction. The default one is row. The default flex direction value is row. That is the default value. So if you don't provide any value for flex direction, it will be row, and that is why I said by default the main axis is horizontal from left to right. But also flex direction can take different values like column, row reverse, and column reverse. So let's go to the browser and see how these values for flex direction will affect how our elements are aligned, because we have said that our elements are always aligned along the main axis. So now they're aligned from left to right because the main axis is from left to right. So if you change the direction from, let's say, top to bottom or bottom to top, how will the elements be aligned? And let us go to the browser and see how that will be. So you can see that we put the flex direction to be row and nothing happened, because you say that row is the default value for the flex direction, and row places the main axis horizontal from left to right. So you can put here, let's change the value to be something like column, and you can see when I say column, you can see now our items are stacked on top of each other, because now the main axis will be from top to bottom. That is the main axis, and I've changed the direction of the main axis using the flex direction. I think you have seen the difference. Now the main axis is top to bottom and the cross will be left to right, because I've changed the value using the flex direction property. There's also this called row reverse. There's this one, row reverse. So row reverse is row, but the reverse one. So I said the default is row, and row, the main axis is placed left to right. And if you put row reverse, the main axis will be from right to left, just the opposite of the row. And the same is just column and column reverse. Column, you have seen column is from top to bottom, then column reverse will be from bottom to top. So flex direction is used to change the direction of the main axis, and you have said that elements are placed in the main axis. So if the main axis is this, flex direction column reverse places the main axis from bottom to top. So now elements will be arranged from bottom to top. You can see now the 1 is at the bottom and the 3 is at the top. And you achieve that using the flex direction property. I think that one is clear. Let's look at the next property. The next property we learn is the justify content. It's here. Justify content. So you have said that elements by default are aligned along the main axis. So this justify content defines how elements should be aligned along that main axis. By default, elements are aligned along the main axis, and I've seen that, and I've seen how you can change the main axis in the flex direction property. But now there's this called justify content. This justify content specifies how elements should be aligned in that main axis, and it has different values. The default one is flex start. That is the default value, and there's other values like flex end, space between, space around, and we'll see how all those values behave differently. Just to recap, justify content is used to define how elements are aligned along the main axis. By default, elements are aligned along the main axis. Now this justify content is saying how should they be aligned at the start or at the end, or space evenly or space around. All those values can define how elements can be aligned along the main axis, and you can change those values using the justify content property. So let's go to the browser and see how that looks like. So I returned the flex direction to be row. So now our axis is from left to right. You can see that our items are aligned from left to right. That is because the main axis is left to right using the flex direction row. Then this justifies content. I've put the value to be flex start, and flex start means that if the main axis is from left to right, I want the elements to be at the start of the main axis. That is the flex start. That is the default value, and there's this one called flex end. Now flex end is the opposite of flex start. You can see now elements are aligned at the end of the axis. Don't confuse this one with the row reverse. Row reverse was the opposite. It was 1, 2, 3. This one is the 1 was here and the 3 was here for the row reverse. But now if you put this flex end, it's just the same. The elements are aligned from left to right, but at the end of the line. We have said that justify content defines how elements should be aligned in the axis. How? The how part. The default one is at the start. By default, elements should be aligned at the start. And you say that is flex start value in the justify content. Then if you say flex end, the elements will be aligned at the end. Then you can also say at the center, like that. The center. Now elements will be aligned at the center of the axis. If you say center, you can see there's even space on the left and right. There's even space. This space on the left is equal to this space on the right. So you can see these items are perfectly center in the main axis. And I've said main axis is left to right. Then you can also put values like space between, space around. Let us see space around. So space around, you can see there's space around elements. There's space here and space here, but you can see the space at the edges is smaller, but in between the elements it's big. That is space around. So if you want all the space to be evenly, you can put their space evenly. Not space evenly will provide even spaces at the end, edges. All this space is even to this space, is even to this one, and is even to all these spaces are equally. So the space has been distributed evenly amongst the available items, and that is how the space evenly works. Then there's one called space between. Space between. So space between provides space only between elements. So you can see at the edges there's no space, and that is how we say that. That is why we say justify content defines how elements should be aligned. So the elements are aligned using the flex direction. So if you say flex direction row, means that the element will be aligned from left to right in the main axis. Then how do you want them to be aligned? I want them to be aligned from left to right, but they have space between them. Now that is where justify content comes in. You say, okay, flex direction is row. So row will set the main axis left to right. So the elements will be aligned left to right. But how should they be aligned? With the space between them. And that how is set using the justify content property. I think that is clear. You can just mess with this. You can just say here something like column. Then even if you put column, there will be space between the elements. Even if it is a column, any value, even the row reverse, all of them. So you should not confuse the flex direction and the justify content properties. I think that is clear. So we'll learn about the next element, that is align items elements. So you have said that justify content defines how elements will be aligned along the main axis. Now this align items defines how elements should be aligned along the cross axis. So the difference between align items and justify content is that justify content deals with the main axis, then align items deal with the cross axis. And I showed you the cross axis by default is from top to bottom. That is, if the direction is row, if the flex direction is row, the main axis will be from left to right, and the cross axis will be from top to bottom. So if the direction is row, we'll see that the align items will align items from top to bottom. Let's look at how align items work. So align items takes values that are same, but not all of them, but can take values just like the justify content, except this one's for space between and space around and space evenly. But this flex start, flex end, center, all of them can apply to the align items. So the default one is flex start, just like the justify content. The default for align items is flex start. So just to recap, align items defines how elements should be aligned along the cross axis. So let's go to the browser and see how that is in effect. So if you go to the browser, you can see I put the align items flex start, and that is the default items. You can see if I hover here, you can see there's an arrow. If you look at here keenly, you can see there's an arrow there. You can see that arrow, it points, that is the flex start from top to bottom. If I put here flex end, it will go down, because I've said that align items aligns along the cross axis, and if I say cross axis is from top to bottom. So if I say align items flex end, they'll start from bottom going up. If I say flex start from top going down. And also you can text the value like center, and the items will be center. And the center, that means there is space, there'll be even space on the top and at the bottom, and that is for center. And that is how you can use the align items. And if you are keen, you notice that we can center our elements perfectly at the center using the justify content and align items. Because you have seen, align items puts even space on the top and at the bottom. And if you put justify content center, it will put even space on the left and on the right. So if you put both the align items and justify content to be center, the element will have even space on the left and then the right because of the justify content. You can see, and it will have even space on the top and on the bottom because of the align items. So if you put align item center and justify content center, our elements will be placed perfectly at the center of the container. And that is the best way to center an element. You know that programmers mostly, they struggle with how to center a div. I showed you the margin 0 auto, but the margin 0 auto might not be effective. But this one, for justify content and align items, this one is the most effective way to center your div or any element. If you want to put any element at the center, you can wrap that element in a container and give that container to have a display of flex. Then you can set the justify content to be center and the align items to be center, and I can promise you that that element will be perfectly at the center of that container. So that is how you use the align items and the justify content. So let us look at another element, that is flex wrap. So this flex wrap element, this flex wrap property, let me just write it here, flex wrap. The default value is no wrap. I'll just put there no wrap, then I'll explain. This flex wrap property defines whether elements will wrap to multiple lines or not wrap to multiple lines. So the default value is no wrap, and no wrap means that elements will not wrap to multiple lines. So let me just duplicate these things. I'll put them, let's say like that. I've just copied them and I've put a lot of items there. And if you go to the browser, I'll just go to the browser and see how those elements will try to fit in the same line. And that is the default behavior of flex children. All of them, they try to fit in the same line, because by default the flex wrap property is set to no wrap. So let's go to the browser and see that. So if you go to the browser, you can see that, like I told you, our elements, all of them will try to fit in the I copied the elements, but I forgot to rename them. No problem, but there's just 1 2 3, then 1 2 3, then 1 2 3 3 times. I just copied this children and pasted it thrice. That's why you can see 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. But just assume that these ones are different elements, they're not the same element. Let us say these ones are 9 elements. Let me just rename them here to avoid confusion. 1 2 3, this one should be 4, this one should be 4, this one should be 5, that should be 6, 7, 8. The last one should be 9. So you can see I have my elements 1 to 9, and all the 9 elements, they try to fit in that same container. So if the space is too small, they'll shrink for them to fit all of them. And that is the default behavior. That is the default behavior of the flex items or flex children, because I've said that by default the flex wrap is set to no wrap. But if you want to change that behavior, you can put there wrap. And if you put the value to wrap, the element will be arranged there, and if this space does not, this element, if it does not fit to this space, it will go to the next line. And that is how wrap, if the space remaining cannot fit the element will move to the next line. Or in short, this flex wrap allows the element to wrap to cover multiple lines. And that is how you change the value to flex wrap to wrap. And there's also this value called wrap reverse. Wrap reverse is just the reverse of wrap. They'll wrap, but from, you can see the normal wrap is they start from at the top, then they go. Now this wrap reverse, they start at the bottom. You can see 1 is here, then 4, then 5, the opposite of, just the reverse of the wrap. And that is it with the flex wrap. So just to give you a heads up, if you put flex wrap to wrap, you unlock a new element called align content. Let us look at align content in the VS Code. So if you look at this align content in the notes, it says that aligns flex lines where there is more than one line. So for you to use this align content, you have to have more than one line. And for you to have more than one line, you have to set the flex. You have to set the flex wrap to wrap. So this flex wrap has to be set to wrap for me to use the align content. If you don't set your flex wrap to wrap, the align content will not work. And don't confuse the align content and the align items. They are two different things. They're kind of the same, but not that similar, but not the same. You can see align contents aligns items along the cross axis of the flex container, but for it to have effect, there must be more than one line. But this one align items can have effect even if there are no multiple lines, and you have seen how that was. And also this align content can take values just like the ones for Flexbox. The default one I think is FlexStart. So I'll just give it a FlexStart value. Then let's go to the browser and see how these different values are. You can see that if I put align content to FlexStart, the elements will be at the start, but that is not the default value. The default value is stretch. Yeah, stretch is the default value for the align content. You can see this is how the elements are. Even if I remove the align content, the element will just stay the same, because this is the default value of the align content. The default value is stretch. So if I change the value to, let's say, FlexStart, they'll be at the start of the cross axis, and if I put flex end, they'll be at the end of the cross axis. And that is how you play with the align content. And this align content can also take values like space between and space around. But keep in mind that the align items did not take these values for space around and space between, but this align content can take values for space around, because you can see here in align items, if I put space around, you can see there's no value called space around. If I put space around, you can see it's complaining, it's showing this exclamation mark, because the align items cannot have the space around value, but this align content can have this space around value. So you can have all the values for the justify content. So you can say flex, not flex, space between, and there'll be space between. You can say space evenly, and there'll be space evenly. And that is how the align content is. So the align items is used to place items along the cross axis, but align items has minimum values. It only has flex start, flex end, then center and stretch, only 4 values. But this one has more values than the align item. But you have said this align content, you cannot use align content if the flex wrap is not there. The flex wrap has to be there. You can see if I turn off the flex wrap, this align content automatically turns off. You can see this one is faint, and there's this exclamation here saying that the flex wrap no wrap property prevents align content from having effect. So if you have flex wrap set to no wrap, and that is the default, you cannot use the align content. So for you to use align content, you have to put flex wrap to be wrapped first, then you can use the align content. And I think that one is clear. So let's go to the next element, the next property. So the other property is this one called flex flow. And flex flow is a shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap. So I can put here, let me put it where? Let me first put this flex wrap, or I'll put this flex direction a little bit down. Yeah. Then I can put here flex flow. And actually flex flow is a shorthand property for flex direction. So here you have put the direction. Then here I'll put the flex wrap. So for flex row, the first property for flex row is the value for the flex direction. And I can say flex direction to be row, then flex wrap to be wrap. So instead of putting these two values, I can just put just one value called flex flow and define the direction and the flex wrap using one value. So just flex flow is just a shorthand for the two. And in the browser, my elements will just behave the same, because this flex flow is same as saying flex direction. Flex flow row wrap is same as saying flex direction row, then flex wrap wrap. And you saw how those were in the browser. This is just the shorthand property for writing the two values at once. and that is it with the flex properties for the parent. You can see all these values, you put them in the parent container. All this, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 values, I've discussed them, and those are for the parent container. Now let us look at the values you can put in the child container. All those values that we saw for the parent container. Now let us look at the values that you can put in the child container. So let us dive into the child element properties. Before you go to the child element properties, I think there's a property that is not there in the notes. It's called the gap property, and the gap property is for the parent. This gap property is for the parent. So the gap property is used to add a gap between children, between the children items. So I can say gap 20 pixels like that. Let's go to the browser and see how this is. It's just used to add some space between the elements. So if you go to the browser, you can see that our elements now have some space. Let me just turn off this justify content. Let me also turn off this align items, flex, align. I can turn off all these properties, and you can see now if I turn off this gap, you can see they'll be at the same line, but they'll not have space between the elements. But if I want those elements to have some space between them, I'll put this gap property and say any value that I want, and you can see there's that space between the elements. And we said that you can also put space between using the justify content, maybe space around or space evenly. But if you don't want to use the justify content, you can use this gap property, provide space between elements. And the gap property works for both. You can see if I put let me put what is that? Let me put the flex wrap. What is the flex wrap? I think I removed the flex wrap. So let me put this flex flow. So you can see this flex wrap has, let me turn off the gap, you can see. So without the gap, you can see that there's no space between those elements. But if I put in the gap, you can see there's space. And that is how you use the gap property, just to add space between two children elements. So now let us look at the properties that you can use for the child elements. Now if you want to style each child independently, there are some properties for each child. You can see these properties. If you apply these properties, they apply to all the children at once, because we are putting the properties in their parent. But now let us style each child independently. If I style this, let's say if I style the number 1 child, it won't affect the other one, because I styled only one element. And let's say which properties you can use to style an individual flex child. So to talk about this, I just have to allow me to comment all these ones except the display flex. I'll comment all these styles that you have looked at them, and I'll just leave there display flex for you to see how these containers will be, how each item will be. Then I'll remove, let me just remain with 3 children's so that you can see the effect easily. I'll just remove the other ones, I'll just delete them. I'll remain with the initial 3 items. I think that one is fine. So if you want to style a specific children, you have to select that children. You can notice that I put each children to have a special class. You can see this item 1 will select only the first item. That is what you learned about classes. You can put one element can have more than 1 classes. You can see if I select item, I've selected all these 3 at once. But if I select item 1, I've only selected the first item alone. So I'll just select here item 1 like that. Item -1. Then the first paper you look at is the one called flex grow. So this flex grow allows item to grow if there is space to do so. So let me give it a value of 1. Flex grow does not have any units. It's just a ratio. So you just put 1 or 2. If you not put something like 1 pixel or 2 pixels, no, it's a ratio. So you put just values without units. So the flex grow, as you have said, it allows elements to grow if there is space. So let's go to the browser and see how this happens in effect. If you go to the browser, you can see that the first element is huge than the rest. Where is that element 1? Let me remove this flex grow. Element 1, let me remove this flex grow. You can see if the flex grow is not there, all the 3 elements have the same size, because that is how I styled them. The size that you put in you can see here, all of them have a width of 150 and a height of 150. So all of them are the same size. But there's this space that is remaining here. So flex grow allows item to take this space. So if I put the item 1 to have a flex grow of 1, this remaining space here will be distributed to item 1. So that's why when I put this, if I turn on this item 1, you can see that item 1 takes all the remaining space that was there. So item 2 and item 3 will just be the same size, but item 1 will be the same size plus the space that was remaining. That means if I increase the size of my container, the size of the item 1 will also increase, because you have said that the flex grow allows it to take all the remaining space that is there. And let's say we have, let me copy this. I'm not sure if you can copy and paste below here in the developer options. Let me try to, it's difficult to write here in the developer options. So let me just go back to the browser and write what I want to write in the browser. I said I go back to the browser, I meant let me go back to my VS Code for me to write the other properties. So let me duplicate this one thrice, and I'll put here item 2 and item 3, and I'll give all of them to have a flex grow of 1. That means I've said that this flex grow is kind of like a ratio. So the remaining space, how will the remaining space be distributed? So the remaining space to be distributed evenly among the 3 items. So I'll put all the items to have a flex grow of 1. That will mean that all the remaining space will be distributed equally among the 3 items. If I put any items to have a higher value than the other, that item will have more space will take more share of the space than the other. So let's go back to the developer options and see how this is. So if you got the browser, you can see that all our 3 items are equal. They have equal size, and there is no space that is remaining, because the space that remained, it was shared equally among the 3 properties using the flex grow property. But if I want the space to not be shared equally, let's say I want item 1 to have more space than the rest of the item, I can give this item 1 a higher value. Let's say I give it 2. So you can see that item 1 is now bigger than 2 and 3. So but also 2 is not the same, because you can see if you look at item 2, you can see it has a, where is that item 2? Item 2. You can see it has a width of 248, but initially we put it to have a width of 150. So you can see also item 2 and also 3, all of them have taken some space, but item 1 is the one that took the bigger share, because we put item 1 to have a higher value. So if I put something like item 3 to have 3, like I tell you, this flex grow is just ratio. That means that item 3 will take 3, item 2 will take 1, item 1 will take 2. So the ratio, the space will be shared in that ratio, 3:1:2, something like that. So that is how we play with the flex grow. So if I put here flex grow, let's say 1, that means item 1 will have a flex grow of 1, item 2 1, then item 3 3. So item 3 will take thrice as much space as item 1 and 2. That is how the flex grow is. So let's look at the next element, that is flex shrink. Now this flex shrink property specifies how much a flex item will shrink relative to the rest. In short, which item will shrink faster. So I'll give this one a flex shrink of 1, and this one's, let me just leave these ones like that. So I put the item 1 to have a flex shrink of 1. Let me just also put this one flex shrink, and I'll give them a value of 0. And to change the shrink value in the developer options, and it is giving me some trouble writing the properties there. So I'll write them here, then I'll change them in the developer options. So I've said that flex shrink specifies how much an element will shrink. So which element will shrink faster? So an element that has a higher value of the flex shrink will shrink faster than the rest of the elements. And shrink is when there's no space. In short, shrink is just the opposite of grow. We said that flex grow, if there's space, which item should take most space. Now flex shrink is the opposite. If there's no space, which item should be squeezed too much than the rest. That is the flex shrink. So if an item has a higher value, it will be squeezed. It will shrink more than the rest of the items. So let's go to the browser and see how that is in effect. So if you go to the browser, you can see that now our elements don't have the flex grow property. So this space will just be blank, because no element is set to take this space, because I removed the flex grow from all the elements, but I added the flex shrink to the first element. So if there's no space, let me just reduce this screen of mine. You can see when it is here, all the elements have you can see all the elements have you can see element 1 has 150 width and height. Element 2 also has 150 width and height. Element 3 also has 150 width and height. But now when the space is less than that, you can see that element 2 has 150 width and height. Element 3 has 150 width and height. But element 1 has 1 or 2. Because we put that when the space is small, first shrink the element 1 until the element 1 has shrunk to maximum. So this element 1 will be the one that will be shrinked until there's no more space to shrink element 1. So you can see now element 1 has 25 pixels. And I think that is the furthest it can go with the shrink. But you can see element 2 still has 150 and element 3 still has 150. These two elements will shrink, but they'll only shrink only and only if the element 1 has shrunk to its maximum. So you can see this, now that element 1 has shrinked, the other ones they'll shrink, but you can see they're not shrinking. They're just maintaining because I didn't provide the shrink value. And that is how you use the flex shrink. Oh, I set the value to 0. And if you set the value to 0, the element will not shrink at all. I forgot that I set the value to 0. If you set the value to 0, that element will not shrink. Okay, let me just put this value to 1. Then item 3 to 1. Then item 1 to 2. If you put all of them to 1, they'll shrink evenly. You can see they shrink evenly. All of them shrink at the same time, at the same rate, because all of them have the same value of the shrink. But if you put any element to have a higher value, let's say I put element 1 3, then the rest will be 1. You can see element 1 will shrink faster than the rest. The rest will also shrink because they have a shrink value, but element 1 is the one that will shrink faster. You can see element 1 has shrinked until it can no longer shrink. That is when element 2 and 3 will start to shrink. And that is the default behavior of the flex shrink. I think it is clear. So let's look at the next one, that is flex basis. Now this flex basis is I can say it's kind of unique because flex basis works in a certain condition. If there is space, let me just recap of how flex grow worked. Flex grow, you said that element will have, we have defined the height and width of the element, and when the elements are placed, some space will remain. And if that space remains, the one that has the highest flex grow value will take the most share of that space. But that is not the case with flex basis. In flex basis, if there is space remaining, you define the size of an element if there is space remaining. Before that space is shared amongst other elements using the flex grow, first the flex basis will apply. So I can say item 1 to have, let's say, a flex basis, and flex basis is not a ratio, by the way. The grow and shrink were ratios, but this one is not a ratio. So you can see the width is 150, so I want the width to be something like 200 pixels. This means that by default the items have a width of 150, but you have seen from the previous sessions, you have seen that if all the elements have a width and height of 150, there will be some space that will remain. And you have said that space can be shared amongst other elements using the flex grow property. But this flex basis, before the space is shared, let me put this one to have a flex grow of 1. That means that item 2 will take, you have said that flex grow, if it has a value of 1 and the rest don't have a flex grow value, this item 2 will take all the space remaining. But keep in mind that item 1 has a flex basis of 200. So before the space remaining is given to item 2, this item 1 first will increase to 200 pixels first, then is when the space will be shared. But if there's no remaining space, this flex basis will not have any effect. Let's go to the browser and see that. If you go to the browser, you can see that element 2 is huge than the rest because element 2 had a flex grow of 1. So it took all the remaining space. But before element 2 was given space, let's look at element 1. You can see that element 1 has a width of 200 pixels. And that width was set using the flex basis. But you can see element 3 is still 150. Initially, element 1 was 150 pixels. but we put the value of flex basis, and that flex basis made element 1 before the space was given to element 2. This element 1 was first set to 200 pixels first, is then now the remaining space was set to element 2. So if I turn off this flex basis, you can see that element 1 will be smaller because all the space remaining will be given to element 2. But if the flex basis is on, the space that has remained first will be given to, let me remove the flex grow to item 2. This is where's item 1? Let me just remove. So this is how our elements are, and there's this space that is remaining. But keep in mind, I'm trying to put it in step by step. Keep in mind I've put flex grow in element 2 and flex basis element 1, but they're deactivated currently, and to show how they're taking effect step by step. So if this space is there, first, by default we said that flex grow, if this 2 has flex grow of 1, it will take all the space. But before this 2 is given that space first, element 1 will first take that space of 200 pixels. Then this remaining one is the one that will be given to element 2. Like that. I think that one is clear. So before any flex grow is given before flex grow takes the space, the flex basis, in short, flex basis has a higher priority than flex grow. And that is it about the flex basics. So let's look at the next one, that is called flex. And flex is just a shorthand for the 3. Let's go to the VS Code and see how that flex is applied. So there's a property called flex. And flex is just a shorthand property for defining the flex grow. Flex, the first one is flex grow, the next one is flex shrink, and the last one is flex basis. So if I want to define all the 3 values at once, you use the flex property. But keep in mind this flex shrink is optional, and this flex basis is optional. So in short, if you use the flex, it's not a must for you to provide the values for the shrink and for the grow. So if I want to put this flex item 2 to have a flex grow of 1, I can just write flex then 1 like that, and item 2 will have a flex grow of 1, because you said that the first value is for the grow, the next value, if I put, let's say 2, will be for the shrink, then if I put here 200 pixels, that will be for the basis. That is how we use the flex short. This is a shorthand property for defining flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. But I've told you that this shrink and basis are optional. So if I don't provide shrink and basis, and I just write flex 1, that means that my item 2 will have a flex grow of 1. And I've seen how the flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basics. I've actually not got the browser for that. The next element that we learn is this element called align self. So align self is similar to the align item. You have seen this how align item worked. Align item defines how elements will be aligned along the cross axis. But this align item is put in the parent. That means that align items will apply to all the children. But if you want your specific child to have a different align item value, you can use the align self property. I'll use it in this item 1. You can say align self, and it takes the value. It takes similar values as the align content. No, align items. Not align content, align items. So align self can have flex start, flex end, all of those values that the align content head. This align content. No, align items head, not align content. I'm confusing align items with align content. Align content is use it when you have the flex wrap, but if you don't have the flex wrap, use this align items. So this align self has the same values for align items, and the work of the align self is to override that value for align items. You say that align items by default has a value of flex start, so I'll give this align self a default of flex end, because also align self has the default of flex start. So I'll give this, let me just leave it as flex start. So let's go to the browser and see how this will be. I'll change this value in the developer options. So if you go to the browser, you can see that there's no change because I put the align self to be flex start, and that is the default behavior of that item. And all these 3 items, they have an align content value, not align content, align item value of flex start. By default, you have said that align item by default is flex start. That's why they're at the start. If you put flex end, they'll go at the end. We saw that at the beginning of the video, how we can change the value of the align item. Now this align self overrides the align item. So if I put here align self flex end, you can see if the align self is flex end, only this first item will go to the end. The rest of the items will take the value of the parent, and the parent said the default is flex start. And that is how you can change an individual child to have a specific align item property. And for you to change, you have to use the align self property. I think that is clear. This align self overrides the align item property. It overrides, but it overrides just on a single item. Like here, I've put it in item 1. So this align self can be put only in the child. It cannot be put in the parent. And all these properties like the flex grow, flex shrink, all of those can only be put in the child. I think I told you at the beginning of these elements. The previous elements they are put in the parent because they apply to all values at once. But these ones that are put in a specific child, it only applies to that specific child. And that is it with the align self. So the next property that you look at is called the order property. So the order property specifies the order of flex item. For example, if I want this item 3 to be the first item, I can give this item 3 a order value, a order property. You can say here order. And let's say if I want it to be the first, I'll give it a value of -1. Because the lower the order value, the first the element will be. If an element has a higher order value, it will be at the end. That is how order works. So if you put this item 3 to have an order of -1, you can later go to the browser and see how item 3 will have that order. By default, an order is 0. The default order, it has a value of 0. So let me put order 0 to these other elements. If the order is 0, it will follow this. It will follow how you arrange them in HTML. But if you mess with the order, if you put any value apart from 0, it will change how this element will be displayed in the browser. Like here, I put the order of item 3 to be -1. You can see in our HTML that item 3 is the last item, but if I put it to have an order of -1, if you in the browser, you can see it will be the first item. So let us go and confirm that. So if you go to the browser, you can see that item 3 is the first item there in there because we messed with the order. And that is how you can use the order property. If you want item 1 to be the last value, you can give it a higher. Let's say it is 2, and you can see it will be the last item, because I told you if the order by default the order has a value of 0, but if the order has a lower value, that will be the first element, and if the order has a higher value, it will be the last element. So in item 3, the order is -1. It's low, that's why it's the first one. Item 2 has an order of 0, it will not move, but item 1 has an order of 2. So item 1 will be the farthest because it has the highest order value. You can just, if I find this item 1 to be 1, I can just put here 1. And if I put it 1, you can see item 2 is the first because item 2 has an order of 0. So I can just put this 2 for it to be the second item. But this one, I'll put it 3 for it to be the last item, like that. And that is how you can play with the order and give any values to your order. Like you can say I put item 3 to have an order of 1, then item 2 to have an order of 2, then item 1 to have an order of 3. And that is how those items will be arranged in our box. And I think that is it with the order, and also that is it with the Flexbox. We have looked at properties that you can use in the parent and properties that you can use in the child. And we have seen how we can center our elements perfectly at the center using Flexbox. And that is it. That was there for Flexbox. So see you in the next class. Peace out.